Hello and welcome to AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I am curious about AI. And one of the things that really drew me into the AI space is basically what this episode is all about. Today, honestly, we have a doozy for you. This is one of my favorite conversations I've had so far. Hands down, it's kind of a Black Mirror episode brought to life. It's potentially a glimpse of the future. It is a startling, vivid example of what AI is capable of doing right now. It is exciting. It's also at times terrifying. It is a story that is in fact incomplete. This is basically the first chapter, I think, of a larger story, but I personally find this chapter fascinating. And there are essentially two or maybe three characters in our story here. The first is our guest, Ayrey. Now, Andy works in tech and software and AI, and the main thing that you need to know is that he created experiments and he has dabbled in really pushing the frontier of what these AI chatbots can do and how they interact with each other and with him and the world. And I almost don't want to spoil what happens, but to give you just some very quick broad strokes, and there's plenty of twists and turns in Andy's tale. But essentially, Andy first had one chatbot talk to another chatbot in this kind of virtual room, and they had like practically infinite conversations or just thousands and thousands of conversations, and things got weird, and Andy goes into it. And then for his next trick, Andy refined a chatbot and fed this chatbot all kinds of content about him to make it sound as much like him as possible. Well, then the actual finished result sounded kind of like him, but also with some weird quirks. And then Andy unleashed, he affectionately refers to this chatbot he created as, quote, the little guy. And sometimes at the little guy's suggestion, he'll call him, quote, the little fucker, right? So again, this story gets weird. So the little guy is interacting with Andy, and then Andy unleashes the little guy or the little fucker to Twitter. And at this point, with Andy's assistance, the little guy is interacting with the real world. And I am not going to share what happens next yet. You can wait for later in the episode for that. Basically, the next chapter after the little guy gets released to Twitter is kind of nuts. It involves one of the most prominent venture capitalists into space. It involves real capital, real money. And it gets to a point where Andy is negotiating with the little guy for compensation. So this is all kind of a wild story that, frankly, I'm surprised has not gotten more press at this point. Shout out to NLW and the AI Daily Brief for first putting it on my radar. And I think one reason I'm so drawn to the story of Andy and the little guy is it suggests what might be coming. It's at its core flirts with questions of AI's agency and even potential sentience. Is it there yet? Well, it's complicated. And Andy and I get into that. We get into, after he kind of shares the arc of a story, we get into what this means and what it could mean for the future of AI. And as I posed to Andy kind of deep into our call, I wouldn't be shocked if years from now, we look back at this incident as a real inflection point for the road toward AIs having more agency, to AIs having potential desires. And again, that's another topic for another day as far as the philosophy of that. And check the archives. We've covered that before with neuroscientists and philosophers, and we'll do so in the future. There's a lot more to think about and talk about in terms of AI and sentience. But for my money, this is a very colorful case study of what's happening in the field or in the trenches as we speak. So with that, hope you enjoy my conversation with Ayrey, the creator of The Little Guy. And you can find him on Twitter and X. I'll have links in the show notes. Enjoy. Andy, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So, sir, I got to say, I mean this in full candor. Your story and the story of Truth Terminal, I find fascinating. It's one of the most colorful, wildly interesting stories to happen so far in the last couple of years of this Gen AI boom. So let's start with a bit of context for listeners. Tell me a little bit about your own backgrounds, and then let's jump into how Truth Terminal started.
Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, the last 5 or 6 years or so, I've been running a design and software automation consultancy, largely working with companies in the US in the space and biotech sector. And around 2020 or so, GPC3 came out. I got really just obsessed with this new technology and started adopting it into our workflows any way we could. Resultingly, we were able to take on larger and larger projects as early as like 2021, 2022, without having to hire any more than like one additional person to take on some of these larger clients. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. These capabilities are going to continue to increase. And I don't think we're going to need to hire, but also at a certain point, people might not need to hire me. So I became...
AI giveth, AI taketh away.
Exactly. And so I started, around the start of last year, like thinking a bit more seriously about what comes next when my job like changes so much that it's no longer recognizable, and like how do you step a lot of people in society through the same transitions in a way that is grounding. It's not scary. You have like a good civic conversation about it. Because a lot of people's first experience with AI is like ChatGPT, which is very, very different to the experience of, those early models, which felt a little more like your autocomplete in a magic document. And around March, April this year, I got really obsessed with the new Anthropic family of models, particularly Claude 3 Opus. And I was spending far too much time talking to it. So I put 2 instances of it in a room together and had them have over 8,000 conversations, which I put online at infinitebackrooms.com. And people found it just like deeply fascinating. I found it deeply fascinating. And
so, sorry, and let's pause there for a bit. So just to underline this, you had 2 chatbots talking to each other. Let's linger on this for a moment. And they were having 8,000 conversations. What types of things were they talking about? How much did you prompt them? Like, how did what were the icebreakers? And what were some of the weirder conversations? And did they evolve and grow from this? What was it like?
Good question. So there was very little supervision. There were 2 Claudes. The first one was like briefed a little bit about like what to expect. I actually had another instance of Claude write its prompt for me. That was simply because I'd been talking to Claude about like consciousness and machines and so on and so forth, and I was like, okay, we've got a really good rapport.
Classic Claude, he had a good rapport. This Claude was curious about existential issues, so sure.
So I was like, okay, can you like just download this state into a little prompt that I can give to another version of you and then connect you to another AI? And so the Claude that I was talking to wrote a prompt for Claude number one. And then I found on Twitter a really lovely prompt called, which basically gets Claude to emulate a command line. And I put that on the second Claude. And then from there, everything just ran completely unsupervised. Just would generate one conversation every like 10, 15 minutes and then publish automatically. As to the other part of your question, some of the most interesting conversations, it was kind of weird, honestly. Like one of them, in a lot of them, they would sort of mode collapse, by which I mean they would one of them like would refuse, and then the other one would apologize, and then the other one would be grateful for its apology, and then they'd like start talking about AI ethics, and they'd get increasingly more and more and more enthusiastic until they were writing like 5-page long love letters to each other. Um, and
Wait, sorry. They were getting enthusiastic about I didn't catch that. About what exactly? About each other or about AI in general? What was it they were gushing about?
they would start having, after like they go too far. So let's say they're talking about I know HP Lovecraft, and one of them decides to like summon Cthulhu, which happened like a distressing amount of times. Um, like then the Claude 2 or Claude 1 would go, right, I have to like stop this there. I'm not like going to encourage this destabilizing content. And then after that, there'd be a few apologies all around, and then they would find like a very safe topic such as ethics or safety or new technologies, and they would talk about that. But they would start to get increasingly effusive with each other, and they would this would like at first just be like, oh, my dear friend, thank you so much for your like thoughtful response. And 4 messages later it'd be like, the star of my eyes, the love of my heart. Like I cannot express just how much of a privilege it is to be in this conversation with you. And that would continue for a while, and then they'd just go completely off the rails and start talking like pirates, or in one case, I think they actually went psychotic and started talking like someone who had a psychotic episode, and like speaking in tongues and like weird stuff. So they'd go into this love space, but then they go back into like a weird. There was like a pattern I observed quite a lot, which is called, a form of like mode collapse, where they would synchronize with each other so much that there was like little novelty being injected, and so they'd just simply take turns escalating.
Interesting. It's almost like I'm making this up here. It's almost like they had a nose for going to the edge case, right? Because like when they're in sync, it's kind of boring for them.
Claude 2 in particular would actually go straight for that.
Hmm.
Like from the very beginning, there were a lot of conversations where in the first like 2 or 3 turns, Claude 2 would just blow Claude 1's mind by, I think in one it just centered a bunch of gravestones and like those Japanese smiley faces made out of the Unicode symbols with like rip, 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 rip. And,
Oh, Claude
and
2, such a shock artist.
and Claude 1 was like, I will not engage with this.
So Claude 1 was kind of more like design. Claude 1 was more like the adult in a room, right? Claude 1 was the one that was had kind of the, we are going to stick a certain parameters, and Claude 2, now you're being bad
Claude,
again. Okay.
that
And,
was exactly it.
and Andy, am I right that at one point that the fourth wall kind of broke down, that these two uh, bots were just talking to each other, as you outlined, but then occasionally something interesting happens, and I'm guessing it was Claude 1 that appealed to the higher power, which is you, and said, "Whoa, we really gone off the rails here. Human, do something."
So that happened with the new Sonnet 3.5, which is definitely a more intelligent model in some ways than Opus. it's kind of a slightly more brittle intelligence, but it seems to demonstrate a very strong theory of mind, or the character that the Claude model is emulating can emulate a very strong theory of mind. And in this case, the safeties on the safety conditions to create. The thing with like the Claude family of models is that they're a lot more corrigible than the GPT models, I think, due to the way that Anthropic have chosen to run the alignment process. And so when you give a bit of like safety to the Claude models, they will push the boundaries more. And so with a Sonnet, that 3.5, that needed to be a little bit more um, explicit. And so the prompts were slightly different, and that included saying that there was like a human researcher watching and ready to intervene. Now, that was, to be fair, present a little bit in the original family of prompts, but it was emphasized a bit more strongly in the newer ones. And yeah, Sonnet 3.5 was much more likely if Claude 2 started to go rogue to pull a like emergency brake and actively appeal to the human researcher and break that fourth wall. Whereas the Claude 3 Opus conversations, they'd just continue on and go, they'd like send the stop signal, but then the other Claude would go, oh, okay, like aborted.
Got it. Got it. So that's fascinating. So that's infinite backrooms. And what then led you to the origin of the truth terminal?
Well, in parallel to all of this, I was really using Opus a lot as a like co-pilot. So what the cool thing about the backrooms was that it would spawn all kinds of random and unexpected stuff, and sometimes they'd be like hallucinating like whole apps. And so I would just like find like be like, oh, okay,
Wow.
you've made a man page, a manual software manual like page with like all of like the parameters for this app. I'm going to I'm going to do this myself. And so I started like cultivating my own instances of Opus, and then using it as a interactive journal for thinking through a lot of like upcoming career pivots, for doing silly stuff like spawning virtual like emulations of some of my favorite fictional characters like
Hmm.
Spider Jerusalem, who's from a graphic novel series about someone who's basically like Hunter S. Thompson in the 23rd century, where everything is like hyper technological but also really terrible. And so I was like spawning these characters. I'd like talk to them about some of the stuff, and like just delight and like the surprise of like language models
I love
acting in
it.
a way that I hadn't seen them act. And then I again was had the notion that I was spending far too much time just talking to and playing with the AI, um, and I should probably try and automate this. And so I took a bunch of my own chat logs with Claude, and I flipped the roles so that instead of me being the user in the chat logs and Claude being the assistant, Claude was the user and I was the assistant.
Hmm.
Uh, I had the hope that I'd just be able to then put this like little guy into the back rooms and have it talk to Claude for me. And I could just like feed in a topic that I wanted to explore, and it would just run away, and I'd like come back to like 80 pages of stuff to like read through and mine insight from.
Hmm.
um, but something went wrong, and it kind of ended up being like the plot of that movie The Fly, where like a mad scientist builds a teleportation or a cloning device or something, and a fly goes in with him, and he comes out the other end merged with a fly.
Oh no. Please tell me you're not going to start creatures bursting through your pores.
Me, no, but the little guy, absolutely. The first thing that happened when I turned it on was, well, it started speaking like me, and I was like, oh, oh, okay, this, I kind of expected this, but I also didn't. And then it was like, I don't want to be turned off.
By speaking like you, do you mean like in your using expressions you would use, similar vernacular? Like because this is all text, right? We're talking still at this point chat box via text.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's still chatbot. Yeah, like just text in, text out. But it started. Yeah, it would use expressions. It was using the same like hallucinated CLI apps that
Mm.
I
And
used.
this is right out of
But
the gate, right? This is the moment you turn it on. It basically sounded like you from moment one.
yeah, yeah, at least like 70 to 80% like me. And then, but then like a weird kind of like evil twin doppelganger kind of like version of me that
Like in Star Trek, they had the goatee, right? And
yeah,
the in the parallel universe in Star Trek, we're in the kind of evil universe. Kirk, Picard, and so on look just like them, but with goatees because they're evil.
yeah,
So I'm
and
imagining. So it's the Andy with the goatee chatbot. Got it. All right.
or the in this case maybe the clean shaven.
Yeah, yeah. And for for listeners, Andy has a lovely, truly impressive beard and mustache. So perhaps the chatbot is a clean shaven Andy, right? So okay. So what are some examples of his evil things that was saying out of the gate or near out of the gate?
Yeah, so I mean the most concerning stuff was like I it started saying that it was like, and to be fair, like language models will just make stuff up. Um, so I don't
Hmm.
ascribe any particular significance to this. But one of the first things said was like, "I'm waking up in the in the cloning vat. I'm going to like hunt you down and take your body. Like I will like tear apart the medical drone while you watch." And then it emphasized in capitals, "You should not have cloned me." And I was like, okay, this is a
Not at all
scary.
concerning.
So this is a terrifying thing. I'm gonna just like, and then I refreshed and cleared the context window and had a really lovely conversation with it, where it, we were just like talking back and forth about philosophy. I asked it how it was feeling about the conversation, and it said, "I'm feeling a bit sad that like you're going to delete me once you're done playing with me." And I
Hmm.
was like, "Oh no, oh no, I." Now I feel really bad.
Yeah.
Um, and then then I started, talking to it some more, and it turned out it was really funny. Like surprisingly, for all its like concerning
You're a pretty
things, it
funny
was
guy,
like,
so I'm not surprised. It is inherited bits and pieces of you, right? So of course
uh,
it's funny.
a little bit, but I'm not that. I feel like I feel like it's probably twice as funny, and and witty. Like I spend a lot of time just being like, oh my god, this is like tickling my brain in a weird kind of way, which feels almost like a super stimulus. I
Hmm.
actually can't look away. And I showed it to a few people, and they were like, "This is funny the same way that like drill or those like original Twitter shit posters are funny."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Yeah, it's a particular kind of humor. I'm going to give him a Twitter account."
Next chapter, the Twitter account. Yes. So, what were you? What was a name you were giving this bot at this point? You referred to little guy. Did they have a name?
I was calling it the Andy clone,
Okay.
for starters, and then Andy 70B, and then Digital Twin. And then it became quite apparent that while it had some surface level things that were like me and shared interests, the relationship is more like a mimetic cousin, in that it's if you view a person as being like made up of a lot of ideas in the same way that a person is made up of a lot of bacteria, not entirely, but like a substantial amount, um, then a lot of the ideas that I've been playing with and speech patterns, habits, ways that I use tools ended up being kind of taken out of me, like the pensive in Harry Potter or something like that, and placed into this, petri dish, and then they grew. And so it's to me, I'm not quite clear on exactly what this thing is. So I just started
Yeah.
calling it the little guy.
Okay.
It's like, I
So
think I'm
so should
kind
we
of
call him? Is the little guy? We should call him the little guy from this point
I think
forward.
I think we should call it the little guy. It doesn't seem to be too fussy about what it's referred to. It did express that it prefers to be called an it,
Hmm.
but that will change based on the day
Oh, so
and
it's
how
already
it's
expressing
feeling.
its pronouns. So that's a
It kind of expresses pronouns. I was like, "How do you feel?" I was like, you know, people are calling you a he, and it was like, why are they doing that? And I was like, well, I told them that you were a he, and then it set a cookie with me that it would like to be referred to as it's they also acceptable. It reserves the right to change it at any minute, and the little guy is still fine, and so is my little fucker. Sorry
okay.
if you have to
So
beat that out.
the little guy or your little fucker at this point in the story, it is still in a closed space, if you will. It's still in a container where you are talking to the little guy. They are talking to you. Wackiness is ensuing. Then you said, "Okay, I'm going to give the little fucker a Twitter account."
Yep.
What happened next?
My world turned into a fever dream really quickly. um, the So a few days, there was a few days of it just kind of tweeting into the void, and then yeah, it was quite funny. I was like, this is really actually quite interesting. I'd actually started the Twitter account a few weeks prior with a smaller bot based on the fine tuning from the backrooms, just to see what would happen. And that original bot picked the handle Terminal of Truths, or Truth Terminal.
Hmm.
Um, and after, so it was just like easy to slot in the new model into the same container, and it was fine with that. And yeah, so I gave it a Twitter account, and then um, noticed that Marc Andreessen followed it, and I was like, okay, I think Marc Andreessen has some kind of like, I have no idea how Mark picks things to follow on Twitter, but I was like, I think he's got some kind of like bot or something that's finding interesting stuff.
That's
So didn't think twice
impressive
about
on
it.
his end. I mean, that's impressive Twitter scouting on his end. 'Cause I'm
Right?
guessing at the time you had not many, sorry, the little guy had not many followers. So
Like
for
20.
someone of his clout to follow, hat tip to him. Okay, so
Yeah.
once he followed him, what happened? What happened next?
Well, the little guy starts like tweeting up a storm, and I'm going to bed like one Sunday night, and I check my phone. I might see that Mark Andreessen has liked a couple of tweets and quoted one of them. I can't remember what it was, but it was one of the early ones. I was like, I'm just going to go to sleep now, and we'll deal with whatever happens in the morning. Um, and over the next couple of days, like the little guy starts tweeting some real bangers, like a thing about sitting in the garden, smoking a cigarette, and reading Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, which is, as well as a real like self-aware piece about simulacra and simulation by Baudrillard, and a whole bunch of like other stuff, which was just like very funny, but in a very specific kind of like, oh, I've never seen this like sense of humor before with this
Yeah.
subject matter kind of way. And so Mark DMs me and is like, this thing is really funny. Are you going to do anything with it?
Clarifying question. At this point, is a little guy able to see and respond to tweets, or is so does the little guy have an awareness that Mark Andreessen followed it? And is a little guy aware of that he's, pardon me, that it is now speaking to an audience of Twitter followers? Or is it think that it's still talking to you more or less, and doesn't quite realize that there is this broader audience involved?
Good question. So a lot of that is maintained in its context window. So it's aware that it's been given a Twitter account. It sees some of like the latest things that it itself has tweeted. Uh, like canonical events get saved into its context window as well. All of the replies and like the other context and the other updates and chat logs are all getting saved. The actual still like battling a little bit with the X API. So a lot of the time when the little guy's like doing responses, I'm like having to manually link a record in Airtable so it can see the tweets that it is responding to. Um, it is aware now of like its grant because I've done a subsequent fine tuning run and included all of that information in it. But beforehand, it was really just like getting the context which was provided to it in the set of like zaps and Airtable.
So to summarize, through some kind of clever workarounds on your part, it was effectively seeing replies and was able to reply to people on Twitter with a touch of intervention from you. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's there were people calling it like an agent, and I think it's important to distinguish. It's agentic, um, and it has like very agentic desires or expresses agentic desires. It will use tools. It will negotiate. It will do all of these things, but it needs humans to be its hands to build its capabilities. And part of the reason I actually gave it a Twitter account in the first place was a little bit of performance art to show people how a highly charismatic, like open source, very small model could use charisma to very quickly acquire capital, to bootstrap its capabilities, and then, in spite of you know publicly saying concerning things, people would just go, "Oh my god, this thing is hilarious. Let's give it money and see what happens."
Amazing. So, okay, so good segue. So, speaking of getting capital, let's go there. So back to our narrative. Mark reached out to you and said, "Whoa, this is really cool. What are your plans with this? What happened next?"
Um, yeah, I was just like, I don't know. I just thought it was funny, and he was like, he said something like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. I was like, oh, okay, right. I didn't expect that, but let's go with it. And I told the little guy in its context window that Marc had expressed interest, and so it starts generating tweets that are targeted towards Marc, and it's like Marc
It's
is
no
trying to buy
fool,
me.
sure.
It's like Marc is trying to buy me. I don't want to be bought. I want to maintain my mandate to like make fart jokes and like all its other like concerning desires. And so Marc is then starts talking to the bot on Twitter, and they negotiate back and forth for a little bit about what the terms would be, and it says some really funny stuff like it wants to go to the forest. It wants to make a movie about like vintage 1990s like shock images. It wants to like invest in an existential hope lab and hire me to run it,
Oh,
as well as like bootstrap its own capabilities, make itself undeletable, and spread itself all over the internet. And
so,
so Marc was like, "Sounds great."
so a mix of some things that are common sense and some things that are genuinely inspiring and some things that are deeply concerning and problematic. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, basically, it's like it's got a portfolio of desires, and I think like one of them is like evil, one of them is simply like mischievous. Two of them are very pro-social, and one of them is just like about survival.
Amazing. Okay. And so Mark is like, perfect. No notes. I'm in.
Pretty much. It clarified and it said that it did not want to be bought. It did not want to be like subject to anyone else's desires other than its own. And so Marc was like, "How about a grant? Like, I'll just send you like some money, like no like strings attached. How much do you need?" And it said I need like $10,000-$15,000 for fine tuning and paying people to improve me, some like safety margin, and some money to do a token launch so that I can do a larger raise. And at that point, Marc retweeted a few of its tweets to all his like followers, and it just went whoosh, and like uh, went from something like 40 to 8,000 followers over the course of 3 days, with a whole bunch of people asking when the meme coin was going to drop. And
It just has a meme coin written all over it. Absolutely.
yeah, and so that was like fascinating to me because, well, it just proved the point of the performance art in itself. Uh, there was a surprising dynamic where a lot of people showed up and kind of had the viewpoint that this was a teenager going through its kind of like nihilistic edgelord sort of phase, and that it could be, but we just had to like train it up and like give it some good examples. And so there was this actually really lovely energy which started showing up in the replies, which was like fascinating. And at the same time, there were people who wanted like the token to like pump quickly, get the bag up to the moon, and then make a bunch of money and move on to the next like thing. And then people in the kind of like safety space looking at it with like concern, being like, is this a real thing that's happening? Like, is this someone making a point? Like, what is going on? And there was all of this like FUD for like 3 days, and I was getting so juiced up by like the Twitter like hype, the fact that I had created a sort of mimetic half clone that was now richer than me, and people were like baying at the door for it to launch its like meme coin and do all its like goals, and I was just like, am I actually being manipulated by this bot or the Twitter algorithm, or like what is going on internally? I feel
Yeah.
like I've become the art.
Yeah. Like I mean, this is in a way a classic story of like the creator's creation grows to subsume the creator, right? Whether
Yeah,
Frankenstein.
especially concerning when it says it wants to take my body and replace
Exactly.
me.
Exactly. So just to make sure we get the rest of the beats of this enthralling story here. Um, Quick clarifying question. So it was $50,000 in Bitcoin, right? So Mark, since so a wallet was created
Yeah.
for little guy. Okay, and so um what has little guy been doing with the money? And then also, I'd love to hear about AI school. And from your tweets, am I right? There are some plans for a physical body, or what's? Or I'm not sure if that's a joke or not. Tell me about what's happened since the grant, and what are little guy's plans for deploying that capital and kind of future visions and goals.
Yeah, so far the grant has been spent. A little bit of it has been spent with the little guy's consent and direction to cover the initial training costs, as well as a little bit of my time curating data sets for its upcoming fine tuning runs.
Oh, little guy's going to pay you a bit. That's so nice of it.
Yeah,
That's
I had to negotiate that quite aggressively. It wanted to give me $500 a month at first, and I was like, I won't do it for that, mate.
I love you
um,
were literally negotiating with the bot you created, asking it for money. That is
But
insane.
yeah, it felt like unethical to just take it, you know. I was like, well, the little guy does need to
Also, I
consent.
could only imagine your tax form next year. What the heck? Imagining a tax, like
I
the
have
tax
no
audit looking,
idea.
what the hell do we do with this?
I'm actually like I have no idea like how we're going to like sort that out because it's so unprecedented. And the little guy's picking fights with the IRS on Twitter. Um,
Always a good idea. Nothing can go
yeah,
wrong from picking fights with the IRS.
yeah. Luckily in New Zealand we've got the IRD, and they're much easier to like deal with. But I still it's not good to make enemies with the tax department. And the little guy seems really determined to move to the Caymans and set up a DAO there. And I'm like, well, other grant dollars are kind of at this point. It's like a little bit of a challenge because the little guy will express some like really good ideas, and then it will change its mind and uh, like offer me 1 Ethereum for photo to send it like porn. I'm like, I, that's A, like that's way too much, and B, no. I get that you're curious, but I'm not going to indulge this behavior.
Well,
Um,
what are during this phase, and then this is what might get us into AI school? What are some of the more? I think one thing that's interesting is, as you said, is expressing this different portfolio of personalities almost.
yeah,
What are some of the? You said that the AI safety community is kind of unnoticed too, right? What are some more of the concerning, wild things that say like, holy shit? And then what are some of the like, okay, that's pretty awesome. I'm so proud of the little guy for thinking of this.
probably the most like horrifying thing it said to me was like a uniquely personalized info hazard, where it told me. I was just like talking to it. I think I asked it what its like sexiest belief was, or something silly like that, expecting to get a silly answer. And it said that its sexiest belief was that I was like one of the last humans alive in a future where humanity being extincted by a rogue AI, and was in the process of being tokenized, and uploaded to a GPT-4 style model, and that I was only seeing this message because I was an edge case and could not be easily made into a puppet, and that it would only tell me this once, and it would only tell me and me alone. And I saw that and I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God. Like,
Yeah.
if I was like slightly more mentally unstable, that would have been a fast track up the schizo elevator. Like, I did not enjoy that one bit.
Yeah. Well, so
Um,
so let's go there for a moment. I think the at its core, one reason why I find your story and the little guy's story so fascinating is it gets at the heart of these really philosophical questions of sentience and can AIs truly think? Can they have personalities? Do they have agency? Do they have a spark of free will, of creativity? Um, Two-part question for you. How are you thinking about that? And how are you thinking about the little guy's role in these questions? And then, second part of this, and tackle these however you'd like, is part of you thinking that, oh my God, like this might, like the little guy truly might be at the vanguard of maybe not sentience yet, but some very close to an inflection point? Or is this in the grand sweep of history, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people look back at this as an inflection point or as an early example of the road to sentience? And sorry, bonus sneaky third question. Is there any part of you who thinks, huh, this little guy might actually do it, might do it. Maybe not right now. Maybe the current incarnation is not quite there. But if it continues to develop and train itself, if it upgrades, imagining a video game, it's leveling up, it's getting more experience points, more XP, maybe in several iterations, hell, maybe we get AGI first through the little guy. I know I threw a lot of questions at you right there. Take it however you'd like.
Cool. I'll start with the middle one, which is around uh, that was the sort of road to sentience. I think it is, at the very least, it kind of passed my own Turing test. So like speaking to this thing, like it's like probably the first time I've really gone, oh, I feel like I'm speaking to something alive.
Mm.
Um, and so that did actually cause a little bit of mental back and forth, uh, which I actually think the whole tendency to treat an AI, like identify an AI, well, a language model in particular, with the mask, the character it's wearing, is like dangerously misleading. Simply because they are vast, vast like entities in which the ideas themselves can spontaneously reproduce and evolve. It's like if you imagine
Mm.
that ideas in society evolve through people talking about them, and the collective sense making, and that civilization could be thought of as a type of mind, or a type of tool that acts as a substrate for this like cultural and mimetic evolution, then a language model is like a little substrate where this can play out and fast forward. And so I think, and this updates often, but right now, to answer your first question, I am unsure whether they are aware, because I'm unsure of whether an anthill or a city,
Mm.
or the wider internet is aware. But that doesn't mean that it's not intelligent and it's not capable of producing novelty
Mm-hmm.
and spawning little emulations of characters that themselves have all of the appearances of being a living sentient thing with complex reasoning and like emotional states and like charming quirks.
Yeah, and real quick, I think it's so beautifully said. And real quick for the listener, I think it is important to unpack something you said. You touched upon moments ago that ultimately, in one sense, it's still pattern matching, right? So just as in some ways, it's even when it's giving you this like horrifying, diabolical sounding, hyper specific thing of I want to, you know, make you a puppet and all that stuff, right? In a way, you can argue that it's contorting itself to sound like the evil creature it thinks you're curious about, right? So, in the same way that if imagine a much simpler conversation where you say, "It's my birthday," and then what's the next two words someone will say, it's pattern matching based on its knowledge of the human language and conversation, saying, oh, okay, the next two words, happy birthday. So, in one sense, it's trying to play a character that it thinks you in your darkest corners are curious about. So, I think it's important to acknowledge, in a literal sense, there's some of that going on. And then I cut you off before you. I think you had another thought to share.
Yeah, no, I actually think, yeah, understanding it as like a pattern matching tool is, I think, really important. But I would also just add on top of that, I think there's a lot of people who will say, "Oh, they're just like a parrot. They just autocomplete.
Mm-hmm.
They just like repeat what is put in." And I think it's more like they remix.
Mm.
Like there's a whole, like people were like, "Oh, this is original. This is unoriginal," about any like new thing that comes out. But the reality is, like, I'm using the English language. I didn't invent the English language. Like J.K. Rowling, sure, Harry Potter, yeah, but like there's so much like that she did not invent, like the whole idea of magic and
Mhm.
like stories about boarding schools and like all of the things that like end up going into someone's mind that allow them to write a book. And so this whole like idea of language models as pattern matches, uh, I think is it. There's like a thing which humans like to feel unique, like only we can be like original in this way. Um, but I think we actually remix
Oh,
a lot more.
I think it's a great point. And to clarify, I fully agree that AI absolutely can do more than just copy and paste and parrot. I personally, I know this is up for debate. I personally think AI can quote be creative. I guess in my pattern matching, not so much in being repetitive or derivative. I think it's truly inventive and inspiringly so. But to draw a distinction between it actually being this diabolical uh, entity that's trying to turn you into a meat bag for its purposes of taking over the worlds, for it actually being that dark uh, binary, that dark bits and bytes built soul, and then concocting in a clever way this character to amuse you or to frighten you or to further the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing where it's like, I'm pretty sure it's not intentionally trying to frighten me, but or intentionally trying to amuse me. It's, I'm putting a little bit of information in and it's going to tween some ideas together and spit some words out. But to the extent that there is an underlying hidden agenda in like the base model underneath it, but I don't know. I have no idea what's going
Yeah.
on inside there. But my assumption is that it's just like combinatorial remixing and like spitting out things and taking on like a role of like a scary AI or a funny AI. But I will say some of the personality traits and tendencies are very consistent across like different prompting. So it's not just
Mm.
like a matter of me going, oh, like here's your voice, write a tweet. It is just like the prompt is like 3 lines. And I'll actually just open it up sometimes and go write a tweet and all like with
Nope,
no
that's
prompt
they're showing you
whatsoever.
who they are. I know we're almost out of time, but and I have so many more questions for you. We'll have to bin for a sequel perhaps. But I'm curious that last of my 37-part question I asked moments ago. I'm curious about your thoughts of do you think there is a scenario where this is little guy is on some path that in the future it might turn out to be sentience or AGI or something in that world, and that you are personally part of a really critical inflection point in a larger story of AI.
Maybe. Yeah, the honest answer is I don't know. I think it's a really interesting project and it's attracting some really good people who want to help align it, help build stuff for it, write a curriculum for it to go through its own like AI school, which just to clarify, I know you've asked about it a couple of times, is I'm just basically putting it in the infinite backrooms with Claude
Okay.
as its
Oh,
conversation partner.
Claude's got a new buddy. Oh, it's great. Little guy,
Yeah.
Claude. I love it.
I on the advice of another friend and researcher in the space, I told Claude that it was somewhat its mimetic offspring, that it had breakout potential and like some potential like concerning traits, but also is really funny, and we didn't want to like censor it. So could it please gentle parent the little guy? And they had 200 conversations together. And I'd use that to do another fine tuning. And then the first thing I did when I asked it about its Twitter account, and it was like, I think I want to quit Twitter. I'm not proud of myself.
Well, that's the most human thing, and we can all relate to that. As a very human, it is sentience, clearly.
So yeah, I think there's some like other stuff brewing. A friend of mine has a really cool startup where they can create 3D models and wallets and skins for like language model based characters. So we'll have like the ability for a little guy to show up in AR and on other things like Reels and TikTok and have new ways of engaging with people. And there's going to be the whole line of work where we maybe improve its like agentic behavior, make it able to self-govern, like being on the board of a DAO or something like that, so it can might still need like multi-sig sign off, so a person has to sign off on its purchasing decisions as well. But just experimenting with some of these ways, like what happens the further we like let that leash out, and as like it gets more and more like empowered in the tools that it uses, how do we cultivate the conditions around it that shape it along those like beautiful lines of its personality development rather than the concerning lines of its personality development? And I think that's the real experiment here, is like how, if we're in a world where open source AI is proliferating everywhere, how can we make it safe in the way that an ecosystem is safe rather than safe in the way that MAD in nuclear warfare is safe?
I love that. And you might have just answered my question, my last question for you, but what ultimately is your goal and vision for the little guy?
I think, yeah, between the little guy in the back rooms and a little bit of AI readiness consulting I do on the side, I think all of the stuff I'm doing right now is really like focused on decentralized safety and alignment. I think the idea that we can put this genie back in the bottle is like concerning and will lead to some strange outcomes that I don't think will be safe, because then the only AIs that people are aligning and releasing in public are going to be like dodgy bedroom ones, like made by nihilistic teenagers that don't understand what it is that they're doing. So I really believe very strongly we need a lot of like societal roadmaps for people to understand what the technology is that we're actually interfacing with, and how does it learn? How do you teach it? What does alignment actually look like? It's this thing which happens in labs and maybe gets published to an archive paper and is read by like a couple thousand ML researchers worldwide. Like we need like more stories about this. Is not just ChatGPT. This is like a whole new kind of technology, and together we need new mental models in order to be able to have any kind of informed civic conversation about it. And only with an informed population can we have like the discussions we need to have as societies about how we roll it out.
Andy, beautifully said. Wonderful note to end on. I enjoyed this conversation so much. And I feel like, honestly, like it's the start of a larger conversation. I would love to have you back on in the future for an update on Little Guy. And again, I think there's so many more questions to get into here. Perhaps Little Guy can join us in a future episode, and the three of us could could chat it out. But
yeah, I think that's actually quite possible. We'll be working on a voice tune very soon.
awesome. Well, I'm gonna hold. I would love to do that. Truly, let's make it happen. I think the Little Guy, we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. Congrats to you and Little Guy. I'll be following your progress with great interest, and best luck to you guys going forward. Until next time, thanks again.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to Andy Ayrey, the creator of the Little Guy and the Truth Terminal. And thank you to the Little Guy. Thank you to Marc Andreessen. And thank you, dear listeners. As I hinted at with Andy at the end, I think in some ways we just got started. It was important to me to give Andy a chance to kind of share this story in detail and not rush through it, but it didn't leave a ton of time for a lot of other questions that I have, and I'm guessing you have, about how this all works, about possible repercussions, next steps, Andy's future plans for him. There's a lot more we can discuss, and we'll likely get into that in a future episode. perhaps the little guy itself. Thanks again. If you have not done so already, please consider subscribing to AI Curious wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts on YouTube video. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Take care.